What's up everybody and welcome to another edition of AGR's Pop Culture Reviews. And Fallout fans around the world can rejoice, because Reclamation Day is upon us. Fallout 76 is finally out of beta. Well, sort of. Now, to say that this is my official review is really a disservice to this game, and instead, I'm going to tell you about some of the things that worked with Fallout 76, some of the things that didn't work, in my 50 plus hours in the game already. Now, to say that Fallout 76 has been completely polarizing by the fans is a bit of an understatement, and just like many of you reviewers out there and those who pre-ordered the game, I did have access to the early beta. Unfortunately, there were a lot of connectivity issues, and the video that I wanted to do in terms of first impressions, walkthroughs, and my overall initial opinions didn't happen because I couldn't connect to the server. Now, for me it wasn't a big issue, but for those who pre-ordered the game hoping that they can get early access and couldn't connect, that probably pissed off a lot of people already. Now, to be fair to this title, this is Bethesda, and we know that historically their games have been pretty buggy, and they always have some kind of server issues, especially when they're testing out the beta. But here's the thing, and here's my criticism of Bethesda. You are about to launch easily one of the most controversial titles in your lineup, particularly for a Fallout game, and it behooves you and it's incumbent on you to make sure that Reclamation Day goes off without any problems. I had password issues time after time, and this is essentially what happened to me once the password did work. So roughly about after 3 hours of that nauseating and frustrating connectivity issue, I finally got on and was able to create my character. Now, very similar to the Elder Scrolls V Skyrim and Fallout 4, there is a pretty robust and intuitive creation character model. You have the same number of permutations and different design styles in which to customize your character, whether it's really changing the hair, the facial features, the makeup, certain scars that you want to do. This is nothing revolutionary, and I'm glad that they still have this robust system, but there is a caveat to that. Unfortunately, you can tell how dated this engine is, and some of the problems in terms of how ugly and hideous these characters look, no matter how much you customize them, is still an issue. I mean, look, I have to be honest about this point. I had literally the same experience that I did in Fallout 4, in which I was trying endless numbers of color combinations in order to get a realistic skin tone so that my character didn't look like he was completely irradiated or a survivor of Chernobyl or something. This character creation model, although very versatile and gives you a lot of combinations and endless customization, unfortunately is still running on the old engine, and the result of any combination still looks really hideous and jarring. Now, one of the things that I did find pretty cool about Fallout 76 was definitely leveling up, and there is a lot more emphasis on finding loot, but also I do like the perk system here. The perk card system I think works very well, and I think balances out the game a little bit more. I also love the style of it, and certainly being able to add more and more cards to a certain slot is really cool. It's not to say that the old system was complicated or anything like that. It was actually pretty intuitive, but this one seems a little bit more clean and streamlined, and for a game like Fallout 76 completely online, I think works a lot better. Now, one of the things that I was really impressed about Fallout 76 was the overall atmosphere. The setting is magnificent. That West Virginian wilderness is really cool and very atmospheric. The minute that I launched into this world and got out of Vault 76, I was hooked and immediately immersed myself in this world. Fortunately, the natural topography of the land adds another layer and almost adds another character to this game. The fact that it's a lot more vertical and more wild really makes this setting stand apart from the rest of the Fallout games. The other aspect of Fallout 76 that was really impressive is how stylized the visuals are, and I have to admit the use of a tremendous amount of color palette here is really well done, even though at times there are some questionable choices in terms of draw distances where they seem to kind of haze off in order to render these things properly in the foreground. I think that was a weird design choice. I'm not sure they should have done it. If they were going to use low-res text in the background, that's completely fine, but sometimes the game has this really weird haze about it that is really jarring to the eyes. Now, one of the other things that I found pretty innovative about this gameplay is the fact that you have a mobile workbench. You can essentially set up a camp, so to speak, that you can actually set up in different locations. And one of the great things about this is that since the map is so large, it makes it a lot easier to fast travel so you don't feel like you're grinding, which unfortunately is a pretty big issue in this game. A lot of times, since enemies respawn almost endlessly on a loop, every time you're traveling through the same area, you're essentially taking on hordes and hordes of these enemies, really eating up your resources. Now, crafting, of course, is still a really big part of Fallout. Unfortunately, it has been streamlined and, in my opinion, dumbed down just a little bit. You don't have the endless amounts of customizations that you do in terms of your weapons, unfortunately. But given the nature of an online or always online gameplay, I guess that kind of makes sense and they had to make compromises somewhere. Now, for better or worse, and worse being my personal sentiment, there are some elements of survival management here. I don't know why games keep going down this trend, and in this particular case, it really doesn't have too many consequences in terms of managing your food, when you eat, or if you're dehydrated or thirsty. It's a part of the gameplay, and you should know about it, very similar to other games. Unfortunately here, it doesn't really have too many consequences. It's not intrusive, but it is annoying. Now, admittedly, initially I didn't know that this was part of the gameplay, and every time I heard my stomach grumbling, I thought it was an enemy, and I kept swiveling around to see if something was near me, attacking me. So just be aware of it. So let's take on one of the biggest controversial issues about this game, and that's simply that you don't have any NPCs, and it relies heavily on other players online if you want to have human interactions. And here is where we run into some huge problems. Most of the time, any narrative in this game is really told by either files that you find or audio logs that you're listening to, which makes it very weird. For a game that relied heavily so much on choice and NPC interaction to push along the narrative, and in most cases very interesting narratives at that, to find out that you are really just listening to audio tapes of things that happened before is incredibly jarring and something that you really have to get used to. Many times in this game, I felt like I was late to the party, and whatever drama took place before, I already missed. Now, admittedly, these audio logs are done very well. They're very compelling and in many cases very emotional, but unfortunately, as you're rummaging through the ruins of a world that once was, unfortunately, the juxtaposition of those two things often make it feel like I'm playing two different games. And sadly, most of the time, I wish I was playing the game that I'm actually listening to versus the world that I'm actually in. Even other characters, other players online, it seems like it's just a chance encounter, and most of the times when we see each other, we're kind of like a deer in headlights, and we're not exactly sure what to do with each other, and we don't really cooperate, and that kind of defeats the whole purpose. Ultimately, any encounter you have with another online player is over as briefly as it began, and before you know it, this happens so often, once the player got over the novelty of seeing somebody else in this world, they just kind of went off and did their own thing. Now, unfortunately, as I mentioned before, they are using a very old and outdated engine. This engine should be taken out to the backyard and shot, literally, because it does not keep up with the online gameplay, unfortunately. There is so many performance issues in this game. Now, it's fine for a single-player campaign, and I use the word fine very loosely, but for an online world, it simply does not measure up, and the performance issues here are glaring. I had frame rate issues almost constantly, particularly in areas where I found that there was a lot of firefighting or I encountered a lot of enemies. And here's the thing, the catch-22 about this game is that because enemies respawn so much, you are constantly, almost exclusively, in battle in some areas. In terms of the graphics, the best that I can say is that it's highly inconsistent. Some areas look really beautiful, or at least up to where they should be in 2018, and other areas are just downright ugly, the textures are muddy, a lot of pop-ins here, and of course you have the normal glitches. Now, to be fair, there was nothing that was actually game-breaking, but still, it is annoying to have these things or these issues still come up in 2018. Now, it's not all bad, and I don't want to seem like I'm really beating up on this game, and some of the things that Bethesda did include on this online version of Fallout have been done very well, particularly with the daily events or the events in general. They are exhilarating as hell, even if they're not too consequential, and sometimes the payoff is not that great. But I have to admit, every time you hear those air raid sirens and something happens, it is really fun. And in fact, these events are really like moths to flames to other players. Now, you don't see anybody at all most of the time, but whenever these events take place, everyone and anybody who is online and in the general area literally comes out of the woods to partake and engage in these events. Now, in terms of social events in this game, this is about as good as it gets. Sadly, PvP is a horrible mess, and in my opinion, it's inherently broken. They are so one-sided that it's not even worth it. There is really no incentive to do this, and when you do, it is completely messed up and you don't want to do it anyway. Challengers in PvP are inherently at a disadvantage, as the other person who's being challenged really has time to kind of stoke themselves up and really prepare themselves for that battle. It is stupid and pointless, I have to admit, and that's my personal opinion. If you guys are having a good time with it, that's good, but in my opinion, there is really no point to it and just kind of done as an afterthought. Questing in this game seems a little bit hollow at best. Now, I'm not saying that it's not rewarding in some way, but it is nowhere on the level of complexity as previous titles, and what it really boils down to is you finding a holotape or some obscure type of message, in most cases going on a fetch quest, and then once you finally get there, you find out that everybody's dead and gone, and it's no more consequential. And that's a real shame because this world is massive, and it can offer so much than it has. Now, the reason that I'm not giving my official review on this game and I'm just giving my impressions on it is that it has an opportunity to really fix itself. Bethesda, if you're listening, you can do so much in terms of patches or additions and just adding some things to this game to make it really great. Most importantly though, the thing that you definitely have to add to this game is NPCs. That's what this game is missing. Because right now in its current state, it's really only the sum of its really technically messed up parts. And although this game is as massive as an ocean in terms of scale and size, unfortunately, it's nowhere near as deep. Underneath it all, there are hints of a traditional Bethesda game. You still have that great atmosphere, that wonderful melancholic music that really sets the tone, but unfortunately, those are the only hints right now of Fallout. Does that mean that this game doesn't grab you and doesn't immerse yourself in this world? Not at all, because of the 50 hours that I put into it, I was captivated the whole time. But I have to admit, the ultimate irony here is that Bethesda wanted to make a game experience that was a little more social, that involved a little bit more cooperation. And unfortunately, with this title, I feel more isolated than I ever did in any other Fallout game. And that's a real shame. But I think it can be improved upon if they tweak certain things a little bit, and provide a more robust and substantial narrative. Now, before I go, I just want to thank F&B Collectibles Incorporated for making this review possible and sponsoring today's episode. Alright everybody, so that's my official first impressions video of Fallout 76. As always, I thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next AGR's Pop Culture Reviews.